Vladimir Putin, good evening. I'm listening to you. Please.
Anna Gereikhanova, good afternoon. Rossiyskaya Gazeta, Isol Gereikhanova. Mr. President, yesterday you took part in the summit of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia, and yesterday the creation of a new international organization was announced. How do you assess these plans and why is it necessary?
We asked ourselves this question back when this organization was being created. I think it was 30 years ago, and it seemed that all sorts of other tools were enough to compare watches on security issues. But today it turns out that this is not the case, and these additional tools, especially for the Asian region, are needed, and we need to improve them. At one time, the initiator, the author of the creation of this structure was the first president of Kazakhstan Nursultan Abishevich Nazarbayev, and, you see, he no longer works in this capacity, and the structure itself now Kazakhstan has proposed to create an organization on its basis. Let me remind you that the OSCE developed in exactly the same way. At first it was just a forum for discussing security issues in Europe, and then it turned into an organization. I think that's in demand, bearing in mind that not only on the European continent there are a lot of threats, but also on the Asian continent. I'm not going to list everything now, you're sure. You know all about it. Therefore, in my opinion, it is in demand, in a timely manner, and all participants supported it.
Alexander Lazurenko, good afternoon. Alexei Lazurenko, Mike Izvestia. The first Russia Central Asia Forum has just ended. From your point of view, is Russia still of interest to the countries of Central Asia?
It seems to me that there is even more now. Of course, trade volumes are growing, and they are growing at a much higher rate than in previous years. For obvious reasons, probably, there is no need to explain. We are developing new logistics chains, which largely pass through this region. The countries of the region are interested in this. Finally, there are new opportunities in terms of cooperation, in terms of developing our own competencies. Some enterprises that have long gone into oblivion, now we are looking at how to revive them, and we can do it on a completely new technological basis, and we can do it including in the countries of Central Asia, both for us and for our partners. That's the first part. And the second is how to organize this. How do we organize? For example, work in the financial sector, these services, the transition to national currencies, in what volumes what to do, how to organize a system for the transfer of financial information. There are many very specific issues here, in the solution of which our partners in Central Asia are definitely interested. I am not even talking about issues related to security, to the fight against terrorism, for example, to the situation in Afghanistan. Yes, we are discussing this at the CSTO and the CIS, but this primarily concerns someone, the Central Asian republics. Therefore, a separate format, in principle, will not hurt, and it is in demand. Finally, I repeat, we are working bilaterally with our partners and allies, but when we meet in a format like today, 5 plus more 1 participant, another country, Russia, then we are no longer looking in refraction to bilateral contacts. But, I spoke about this today, we will try to look for such projects and such areas of cooperation that are interesting for the region as a whole. You know, it seems to be all the same, but a look from a different angle, which can be interesting for everyone at once. Here's the thing, and something else. For example, our colleague from Turkmenistan Sergei Vladimir said that it is very important for the countries of Central Asia, for those who do not have access to the world ocean, cooperation with Russia in this format, in a multilateral one, in Central Asia, in order to look for such opportunities and channels together, and we are developing a number of projects. Interesting for us too, connected with other partners. It is extremely important, interesting, and timely to combine all this together.
Pavel Minakov, Interfax News Agency. Good evening. It is no secret that some states in the post-Soviet space are wary of the events in Ukraine. You met with your colleagues at the CIS summit and communicated informally with them. What is your conclusion? Against the background of the ongoing hostilities in Ukraine, the unity on the territory of the CIS has somehow strengthened, remained at the same level, or some negative trends observed?
No. As you can see, all this is passing, all these formats are working, which means that they are in demand, and our allies, our partners want to work in such formats. Nothing changes in that sense. But, of course, we pay attention to some events related to relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, to what is happening between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Everything, we are well aware of this. Of course, our partners are interested and concerned about the future development of relations in the Russian-Ukrainian direction. This is the subject of discussion. It is true, there is nothing unexpected here, and I inform our partners in detail about this, tell our point of view. But this does not affect the character, the quality, the depth of Russia's relations with these countries. Please.
Yulia Bubnova, good afternoon. TASS News Agency, Yulia Bubnova. Yesterday you held a meeting with the leaders of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Tell us how it went and what was achieved as a result of it. Thanks.
It was constructive. Naturally, when relations are in a fairly hot phase, it is not easy to find any common ground, but nevertheless, it seems to me that we managed to do it. In any case, we agreed that all measures will be taken to ensure that hostilities do not resume, first of all. Secondly, which is very important, the parties will take the necessary steps for the return of refugees. And the third, also essential, important element is that we, without pretending to any intermediary role, although, frankly, we were asked to do so, agreed that both parties will hand over to us the relevant documents and their vision for solving this problem, and we will not only try to evaluate these for our part, we also use the documents at our disposal to find a solution, which could form the basis of possible agreements. I mean that Moscow sometimes has more reliable information about the borders between the Union republics than the Union republics themselves. We will raise these documents, raise these maps, look at them and then look for a solution together with our colleagues. So overall, this meeting was very useful. Please.
Pavel Zarubin, good evening. Pavel Zarubin, Russia TV channel. I have a question that I think a lot of people in Russia are thinking about right now. In my opinion, the role of Germany in the Ukrainian conflict is not discussed. If Chancellor Merkel took a rather restrained position, then Scholz, as they say, embarked on all the hardships, and with some amazing ease Germany suddenly forgot everything. What Russia did to unite the German people, with ease, as it seems, turned over the very difficult pages of reconciliation between the two peoples, and now we see previously unimaginable things like German guns again kill Russian people. You are an expert on Germany. How can you explain everything that is happening, and how will this affect Russian-German relations in the future? Thanks.
This is the choice of those people who legitimately came to power in a particular country, in this case in Germany. They must determine for themselves what is more important for them, the fulfillment of some allied obligations, as they see it, or ensuring the interests of their own people, their national interests. Judging by what you said, the focus in this case seems to be some allied obligations, in this case the Federal Republic within the framework of North Atlantic Alliance. Whether this is right or wrong, I believe that this is a mistake, and this mistake is paid for by business, the economy, the citizens of the Federal Republic, because it has negative consequences, economic implications for the euro area in general and for the Federal Republic in particular. But few people seem to consider its interests, otherwise Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 would not have been undermined. They didn't work, but it was such an element of reliability, that in extreme cases they could have been turned on. But now there is no such possibility. Although one branch there, as I said in Moscow, is still apparently in working order, but no decision is being made and, apparently, is unlikely to be made. Accepted. But this is no longer our business. This is the business of our partners. And what the leaders of certain states are guided by is their business. I have stated my version. It seems to me that this is exactly the essence of the problem. Please.
Maria Finoshina, RT International. Good evening, Mr. President. Before you went to Kazakhstan, you met with the President of the United Arab Emirates, and here in Astana, with the President of Turkey. Perhaps the leaders of these countries shared with you some exclusive position of Kiev, which is known only to them. Also, the Turkish press writes that Ankara is now trying to organize negotiations between Moscow and Western countries, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, in Istanbul. How real is this meeting today? How effective, if it takes place, will it be if Kiev does not take part? And how prudent do you think it is to involve China and India in these negotiations?
As we know, President of Turkey Mr. Erdogan has already played a fairly prominent role in resolving a number of issues, including, for example, exchanges. He was really involved personally in this work, and, as you know, there is a result. So we are also grateful to him for this, because we got our servicemen, including officers. That's the first thing. Second, he was an active participant in the organization of grain exports from Ukraine. True, unfortunately, this grain does not go, or minimally goes, to the poorest countries in the world through the UN, but this is another matter. We also discussed this with him, and during our talks yesterday he spoke in favor of somehow structuring the flows of this grain and, above all, directing them to the poorest countries. But that's what the UN Secretary General has to work on. I know he's working, but he's not doing well either. The United Arab Emirates, of course, is also ready for a mediating role, and I must say that the President of the United Arab Emirates is engaged in this, including humanitarian issues, character, exchanges and so on, and not without success, for which we are also grateful to him. India and China always talk about the need to establish a dialogue and resolve everything peacefully. We know their position. These are our close allies, partners, and we respect their position. But we also know Kiev's position. They kept saying that they wanted negotiations, and they kind of asked for it, and now they've made a formal decision that bans those negotiations. Well, what can we talk about here? In turn, as you know, and speaking in the Kremlin when making decisions on the regions of the Russian Federation, said that we are open, We've always said we're open. Even in Istanbul, we have reached certain agreements. In fact, these agreements were almost initialed. That's it. As soon as the troops withdrew from Kiev, the Kiev authorities immediately lost their desire to negotiate. That's all. If they're ripe for it, go ahead. Please.
Igor Yezhov, Ilya Yezhov, Vesti FM, and Mayak. Continuing the international theme, Mr. President, is there any certainty about your trip to the G20 summit in Indonesia? And if so, if you go there, are you ready to hold talks with President of the United States Joe Biden there? Thanks.
I need to ask him whether he is ready to hold such talks with me or not. I don't see the need, to be honest. By and large there are platforms for any platforms. There are no negotiations. The question of my trip there has not yet been finally resolved. But Russia will certainly take part in this work. In what format? We will still think about some direct negotiations with any of the participants. 20. While there is no question, with some of them we are in constant contact, as you know. We have just talked about the position of Turkey, the Turkish president. Turkey is also one of the group of 20, and we are in constant contact with him, with some of our colleagues as well. The President of the United States did not discuss such issues. Please.
Recently reported that the explosive device that detonated on the Crimean Bridge was originally sent by sea, apparently by cargo ship, from Odessa. This fact, how will it affect Russia's position on cargo shipping from Ukraine's ports? Will we, perhaps, hinder it now? And most importantly, that concerns the grain deal, because after all, the agreement was to export grain, not explosive devices. Will this terrorist attack ruin the grain deal?
The Federal Security Service stated that, most likely, this so-called cargo, or rather, explosives, were sent by sea from Odessa, but it is not precisely established whether this was done with the help of grain carriers or not. This is a question. There is no answer to it yet. But if there are humanitarian corridors for the supply of grain to the poorest countries, although it does not go there, but this work was organized under this pretext, if it turns out that humanitarian corridors are used to commit terrorist acts, then, of course, this will call into great question the further functioning of this corridor. But so far we do not have such data.
Kirill Paniushkin, is Russia's possible response being worked out?
You know what? The answer is simple. We will simply close it, and the matter is over. But we must first establish this reliably. There is no such information. Please.
Alexei Yunashev, good afternoon, Mr. President. Alexander Yunashev, live. The other day in Moscow, a man was fined for listening to Ukrainian music. This, as it seems, is a clear overkill, because so soon the film Only Old Men Go to Battle can be banned. There are Ukrainian motives, and Gogol. After all, if fascists listen to folk songs, the songs themselves do not become fascist because of this, do you think? And how should we treat Ukrainian culture now?
I think that we are constantly indignant at attempts to close Russian culture and abolish it. This is complete nonsense. As one of our musicians said, some fools. But we shouldn't behave in the same way. First. Second, the Ukrainian language is one of the state languages in Crimea. In one of the subjects of the Russian Federation, in the Crimea, Ukrainian is the state language, along with Crimean Tatar and Russian. So that in itself is wrong. Third, we have in Russia, I think, about 3 million citizens of the Russian Federation who live permanently with us, Ukrainians. How can we ban their language and culture? We don't even have that in our heads. Therefore, I understand what this is connected with. This is happening against the background of today's emotions. but I think that many of our families know, hear, and love Ukrainian songs, Ukrainian culture. Back in the Soviet Union, hits in Ukrainian were very popular, and I think we shouldn't be like the ones that, as I've already started, responding to your question, they abolish any culture. Culture has nothing to do with it at all.
Отменяют какую бы то ни было культуру. Культура здесь вообще ни при чем. Если сегодняшнее руководство в Киеве считает возможным поддерживать
If the current leadership in Kiev considers it possible to support neo-Nazis, it is possible to support torchlight processions in the center of their major cities and people who walk around with Nazi symbols, then it has nothing to do with Ukrainian culture. Please.
Ludmila Liznova, good afternoon. Newspaper Izvestia, Lyubov Liznova. I wanted to ask about mobilization. You have already said that there are many problems with mobilization, and now many companies do not understand which employees will be taken and which ones will not. I would like to ask you whether we should expect a new wave of mobilization? Will there be a general mobilization? And the 300,000 people that the head of the Defense Ministry spoke about is still an actual figure or not?
Да, но, во-первых, Минобороны вначале предполагала меньшую цифру. Не 300 тысяч человек. Первое. Второе.
First of all, the Defense Ministry initially assumed a lower figure, not 300,000 people. First. Second, nothing additional is planned. There have been no proposals from the Defense Ministry in this regard, and I do not see any need in the foreseeable future. As for the cluelessness I mentioned, it's related to the old forms of accounting that haven't been updated in decades, and when they started doing these mobilization activities, only then did it become clear what quality they were. This information base is now being updated on a modern basis, and it will be as reliable as possible. Therefore, I think that the quality should be improved. Although I must say that this work is already ending. Now there are 222,000 people mobilized out of 300,000 in the forming troops. I think that within about 2 weeks all mobilization measures will be completed. Please.
Andrei Golovko, Alexei Golovko, Russia TV channel. Vesti. In continuation, by the way, of the theme, we are in Kazakhstan now. Here, as we know, there are a lot of people who left after the announcement of partial mobilization. A certain number of them are in other neighboring countries. In Russia, they say different things. Someone calls them traitors, and the State Duma even offered to confiscate their cars.
I would prefer to give legal assessments rather than emotional ones. It is necessary to give in each specific case a legal assessment of the action of a particular citizen. Some people left because they're afraid of something. Some people left because they want to evade mobilization. Somebody else for some reason. In each case, you have to give a legal assessment and act in relation to a particular person only on this basis. It seems to me that it is impossible to act differently. Please.
Thank you very much. Gleb Ivanov, arguments and facts. Again, Mr. President, in continuation of the topic of mobilization. Now the first data on the dead mobilized soldiers are beginning to arrive. In the Chelyabinsk region, the regional authorities announced that several mobilized soldiers died. In Moscow today, they are buried an employee of the Moscow government mobilized on September 23. He had no military training, no military experience. Actually, the question is, how does this happen? When the partial mobilization was announced, we said that all those mobilized would undergo mandatory military training. How is it that people end up at the front not even 3 weeks have passed since the announcement of mobilization and die there? And how, to yours. Look, is the mobilization process going on now? And one more question, if I may, about the Crimean Bridge. After the terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge, from your point of view, how are security measures now ensured at strategic infrastructure facilities, at railway stations, at airports, at gas pipelines, power plants? Can we protect them? Thanks.
As for mobilization, I can say again what I said earlier. The contact line is 1,100 kilometers, so keep it exclusively by troops formed from contract soldiers, especially since they take an active part in offensive operations, almost impossible. That's what mobilization comes with. First. Second, all the citizens who are drafted as part of the mobilization have to be trained, and it is as follows. I said, 222,000 are now in the troops, more precisely, in the so-called forming units, where the initial preparation is from 5 to 10 days. Then they go directly, depending on the military registration specialty, to combat units, where training is from 5 to 15 days. Then the next stage is already directly in the troops taking part in hostilities, and there is additional coordination. But if you look from the beginning of the mobilization to today, basically if you look at the minimum values, then in general it is possible. And not only is it possible, I said, 222,000. We have in the forming troops, 33,000 mobilized people are already in the units, and 16,000 are in the units involved in the performance of the combat mission. But if such questions arise, which you have now formulated, I will additionally instruct the Security Council. There are military people in the Security Council who previously served in the Ministry of Defense, with good experience, who know their business, high-level, and class specialists. I will instruct them to conduct an inspection of how the training of mobilized citizens is carried out, about security. After the terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge, of course, the relevant services were instructed to strengthen control in order to ensure the safety of all critical infrastructure facilities, all of them. Appropriate measures should be taken at energy facilities of different levels, of different classes, at transport facilities. We have a large country, so let's hope that the work in this direction will be effective. So far, it has been possible to do so.
Andrei Kolesnikov, the Kommersant newspaper. Do you think that after all, Ukraine will be able to exist as a state? And Russia? And the second question, Mr. President, do you regret anything?
No. I want it to be clear, what is happening today is not pleasant, to put it mildly, but we would have gotten the same thing a little later, only in worse conditions for us, that's all. So my actions are correct and timely.
Газета «Коммерсант». Как вы считаете, после всего Украина сможет существовать как государство, а Россия?
Andrei Kolesnikov, will Ukraine be able to exist as a state? And will Russia be able to?
Вот я хочу, чтобы было понятно. То, что происходит сегодня, мало приятно, мягко говоря. Но это все то же самое мы получили бы чуть позже, только в худших для нас условиях. Вот и все. Так что мы действуем правильно и своевременно. А будет ли существовать Украина?
Сможет ли Украина существовать как государство, и сможет ли Россия?
Но мы же не ставили перед собой задачу уничтожения
But
Украины.
we did not set ourselves the task of destroying Ukraine.
Вот они взяли,
Of course not.
в Крыму проживает
They took 2.5 million people living in Crimea, 2,400,000, and cut off the water there. The troops had to go and open the water to the Crimea. Just as an example of the logic of our actions, if they had not done this action, there would have been no opposition. The bridge was blown up. Now we need to think 10 times, ensuring communication with Crimea through the territory. How important is it for the Russian Federation? You know?
Pavel Zarubin, after the terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge, massive strikes were carried out on the territory of Ukraine at the beginning of the week. How do you assess their effectiveness, and what is the probability that such massive strikes will still have to be inflicted?
Now there is no need for massive strikes. Now there are other tasks, because, I think, 7 of the 29 facilities were not hit as planned by the ministry. But they get them, these objects, gradually. There is no need for massive strikes, at least not yet. Well, there it will be seen. Everything. Let's wrap up.
Sergei Dyanov, thank you very much. Sergei Dyanov, RIA Novosti. NATO directly says that the defeat of Ukraine will be a defeat for the alliance. Do you think it is possible that NATO will send troops to the territory of Ukraine if the state of affairs on the battlefield becomes catastrophic for Kiev?
You know, this is a question of concepts, a question of legal technique. What is the defeat of Ukraine? Everyone can understand it differently. The fact that Crimea became a subject of the Russian Federation in 2014 is a defeat, or what? What is it? We need to understand what it is. But in any case, the introduction of some troops into direct contact, into a direct clash with the Russian army is a very dangerous step that could lead to a global catastrophe. I hope that the mind of those who talk about this will be enough to avoid taking such dangerous steps. Thank you very much. All the best.